My folks didn't hold back, they made sure everyone knew I'd flunked out. I sat there, quiet as a shadow, at my brother's engagement dinner. Then, right in the middle of it, his fiancée leaned over and whispered, "Wait, you're Daniel Brooks." The whole room froze. Even my dad was speechless. "Thanks for being here with me today. But before everything unraveled at that dinner table, let me take you back." The invitation was still sitting on my scratched-up kitchen counter. Its thick, cream-colored paper and fancy raised lettering looked completely out of place against the cracked formica. "Ethan Brooks and Claire Bennett request the pleasure of your company." It didn't feel like an invite, it felt like an order. Like royalty summoning a court jester. The engagement dinner. My little brother Ethan, the golden child of the Brooks family, was getting hitched. And me? I was Daniel Brooks, 32, the guy nobody bragged about. But I was expected to show up and put on a happy face. My chest tightened like it always did, that same old pressure wrapping around me like rusty barbed wire. It had been 10 years. 10 years since I'd walked away from med school, and I still wore that decision like a scar. I could practically smell the formaldehyde from those anatomy labs. Back then, it meant progress. Intelligence. But over time, that smell became something else, like I was suffocating in someone else's dream. I remember standing in front of my dad, Thomas, in his polished, intimidating office with those dark wood-paneled walls. Saying, "I can't do this anymore," felt like trying to spit out ashes. I braced myself for him to explode. But he didn't. Worse, he said nothing. Just stared. The kind of silence that feels carved out of granite. Weeks passed, and the only words he gave me were heavy, final-sounding statements. I'd wasted a golden opportunity. I'd disrespected everything they sacrificed for me. His office used to smell like old books and the metallic scent of success. That day, it felt more like a courtroom, and I'd just been sentenced to permanent disappointment. Mom, Linda, didn't go quiet. She put on her opera. I'd hear her crying through the thin walls, calling her sisters, stage whispering about how I'd lost my way, how I was just floating through life. She had this signature move, hand to her chest, voice trembling. "Oh, Daniel, we just worry so much about your future." Then she'd sigh. One of those big, dramatic sighs that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Like she was mourning a version of my life that only ever existed in her head. She never once asked what I wanted. She was too busy grieving the version of me she and Dad had written in stone. While I was floundering, Ethan was climbing. Graduated top of his class from a big-name business school. Landed a flashy finance job right in the heart of the city. Got himself a condo with floor-to-ceiling windows that screamed, success. Any time I managed to drag myself to a family dinner, it felt like I was attending a Ethan Brooks highlight reel. One Christmas is burned into my memory. The house smelled like pine and roasting turkey, a scent that used to feel like comfort but now just made my chest heavy. Dad gave Ethan an absurdly expensive watch. Clapped him on the back, practically yelling, "That's my boy. Making moves. Taking over the world." I'd tried earlier to share an idea I was working on, a tech project for the community. Something to help people find local services. Dad gave me a half-hearted smile and said, "Well, Daniel, it's good to have something to keep you occupied." The message was clear, it's a hobby. Not a real job. Ethan, always the star, would offer his advice, dressed up as brotherly love, telling me it was time to get serious. To stop playing around. But his world only had one path, the fast lane. And if you weren't on it, you were nowhere. Those first few years after quitting med school were a mess. Cheap apartments that smelled like instant noodles and loneliness. Dead-end jobs that paid just enough to scrape by but left me feeling emptier each day. The question kept me up at night. Were they right? Had I actually failed? Their disappointment clung to me like a second skin. I couldn't shake it. But the idea for Health Bridge didn't come in some magical eureka moment. It built slowly, sparked by the time I spent volunteering at a local center for people with disabilities. I saw how broken the system was. People drowning in red tape just trying to find a decent doctor, fighting for care they deserved. For a little dignity. I started tiny. Late nights, black coffee, and a stubborn voice in my head saying, there has to be a better way. I taught myself how to code. Put together a basic database that connected folks to local, accessible health services. I'd work deep into the night in my cramped apartment, the glow of my computer the only light. The hum of that old desktop became my white noise. My comfort. Then I got an email. Your little program helped me find a doctor who actually gets what I'm dealing with. Thank you. That one message lit a fire in me. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a reason. A purpose. A small flicker of pride pushed back against the shame I'd carried so long. At a local tech meetup, where the pizza was cold and the presenter was half asleep, I met Alex Rivera. The guy was brilliant. A real coder. Way above my level. But what mattered most? He saw something in Health Bridge. He got it. Even when my own family didn't. He understood the mission. We became co-founders. Built something from scratch. Our first office. Barely a closet above a noisy print shop. Cramped, chaotic, and always smelling like toner and Alex's brutally strong coffee. But it had a vibe. An energy. It felt alive. Like we were building something real. Something that mattered. It became our haven. Health Bridge didn't blow up overnight, it grew slowly, quietly, almost under the radar. First 5,000 users, then 55,000. We even landed a modest grant. We brought on our first non-profit clients and started spreading across the country, one state at a time. Each new milestone felt like a personal win, a quiet, steady counterpoint to the story my family always seemed to believe about me. I made a few attempts to tell them how things were going. I still remember the day I told Mom about a pilot program we just launched in the next state over. It was projected to help thousands. I was excited, proud, even. She listened with that same distant look she always wore when I talked about anything that mattered to me. Her eyes went glassy, her focus drifting. That's nice, dear, she said, barely present. Then came the kicker, did you hear? Ethan just got a huge promotion. He's thinking about buying a boat. He's treating us all to a fancy dinner to celebrate. And just like that, the wind left my sails. That old, familiar weight settled in my chest like a stone. It always circled back to Ethan. Now it was his engagement dinner that had everyone buzzing. Our family group chat had basically turned into a fireworks display, exclamation points and heart emojis everywhere, after he posted that photo of Claire with her hand perfectly posed, that diamond practically blinding. I sent a quick congrats and muted the chat. Their excited noise felt like it belonged to someone else's life, not mine. And the idea of going to this dinner? It made my stomach twist. I could feel the anxiety building for weeks. I already knew how it would go, I'd be the before picture to Ethan's flawless after. Dad would do his usual routine, tossing in subtle jabs wrapped in commentary about my so-called lack of direction. Mom would toss anxious looks across the table, letting out those little sighs between Dad's critiques. Ethan, in all his glory, would flash that particular brand of condescension that only a successful little brother can deliver, polite on the surface, but soaked in smugness. But that night, as I stood in front of my closet, something shifted. A small, stubborn spark lit up inside me. I was tired of being cast in their version of my story. Before heading out, I checked HealthBridge's metrics one last time on my phone. 99,000 active users. Real people. People whose lives were just a little easier because of something I'd built. I caught myself smiling, just a flicker, something I almost never let myself feel. And instead of the bland, funeral-ready suit Mom always hinted I should wear, the one that made me feel like I was mourning my own life, I went for the charcoal gray one. I'd bought it after we wrapped a tough but rewarding contract. It fit great. It made me feel like I knew what I was doing. It was just a suit, a small thing really, but slipping it on felt like finally taking a deep breath after being underwater. A quiet act of resistance before stepping into the carefully curated family theater. The restaurant? Le Chain Noir. Just the name, the star, reeked of the kind of luxury my parents worshipped. I handed my keys to the valet and caught a whiff of something expensive, designer perfume and overpriced food drifting from the grand entrance. Inside, the place buzzed with hushed elegance, the quiet clink of crystal, the soft rustle of conversation, the muted scrape of cutlery on fine china. It was the kind of place where the maitre d' could probably guess your net worth with one glance. My shirt collar, which had felt fine just moments ago, was suddenly strangling me. I spotted them instantly, right in the center of the room at a round table, the best in the house. A perfect little portrait of family harmony staged for public view. Dad, Thomas, was holding court. His voice rolled like low thunder as he entertained Claire's parents, no doubt spinning some tale that conveniently highlighted his own business brilliance. Mom, Linda, fluttered around Claire like a bird on espresso, fussing over an invisible hair on her perfectly styled head. And Ethan? He looked like he'd stepped out of a luxury brand catalog, the sharp suit, the effortless smirk, the air of someone who always knew he'd win. That smug grin, his trademark look. Daniel, glad you made it, Dad said, offering a handshake that felt more like a formality than a greeting. His eyes had already moved on, scanning the room for someone more important. I could practically hear the unspoken warning, don't embarrass us. Mom hugged me, a quick squeeze, too tight and too short, with that faint whiff of her signature lily of the valley perfume. That scent always dragged me straight back to every anxious family gathering we'd ever had. Oh, Daniel, you look neat, she chirped, scanning my suit like she wasn't sure what to make of it, maybe surprised it didn't have mustard stains. Claire, sweetheart, this is our Daniel. Claire Bennett turned to me, extending a hand. Her smile was warm, her handshake confident, and her hazel eyes were calm and sincere. So nice to finally meet you, Daniel, she said. And for the briefest moment, something shifted. I didn't feel dread. She seemed normal. Not wrapped in pretense or ego, just grounded. A far cry from the tension and formality that usually hovered over any Brooks family event. I gave her a small, slightly awkward smile. You too. Congrats to you both. But the conversation didn't stay there long. My parents quickly took the wheel, steering everything back to Ethan. His latest triumph at the firm. His big move to vice president. Claire's impressive family background, old money, of course. Each new detail stacked another brick between me and the glossy little world they all seemed to share, each word polishing Ethan's already glowing halo. When Claire's dad, a friendly guy named Alfred, turned to me and asked what I did, I opened my mouth to answer. But Dad cut me off before I could get a word out. Daniel's our free spirit, he bellowed, laughing a little too loud. The kind of laugh that's meant to put people at ease but never quite does. Still chasing butterflies, huh, son? He gave Alfred a wink, like they were in on some private joke. One where I was the punchline. My neck went hot, that familiar burn rising fast. I run a tech company, I muttered, the words sounding flat and flimsy under the weight of Ethan's accomplishments. But Mom wasn't about to let the conversation linger on me. She shifted gears with practiced ease. Oh, but Ethan's new job, Alfred, he's managing a portfolio worth tens of millions. He tries to explain it, but it's all so wonderfully complicated and important, isn't it, dear? She beamed at Ethan, then looked at me with that unmistakable expression that said, this is what real success looks like, Daniel. Ethan, never one to pass up a chance to subtly flex, leaned back in his chair like he owned the place. Yeah, the market's been a wild ride lately, really unpredictable. But we're holding it down. Big responsibilities, you know, he said, tossing a glance my way. That look, smug, calculated, the same one he'd mastered since we were kids. Not everyone's built for that kind of pressure, I guess, he added, with a shrug that might as well have been a slap. I almost laughed. Pressure? Seriously? I thought about the night our main server crashed, Alex and I working until sunrise trying to salvage a critical update for a state healthcare client, thousands of people depending on us to keep their access to vital services. Or those early days when I'd lie awake worrying if we could make payroll, scared out of my mind about letting the team down. But I kept quiet. No point explaining to people who'd already decided you were small. I just stared at the delicate pattern on the bread plate, my fork picking at food that looked beautiful but tasted like nothing. From my side of the table, the silence stretched wide. I guess I wasn't supposed to contribute to the family highlight reel. But then Claire, to her credit, steered the conversation my way again during a rare lull when Dad was off rambling to her mom about his golf game. A tech company, Daniel. What kind of platform is it? She asked, genuinely interested. It's designed to help people with disabilities get easier access to healthcare resources, I told her quietly. Before she had a chance to say anything, Dad, apparently picking up on the shift, cut in with his usual wave of dismissal. Very niche, of course, he said, smiling like he was indulging a child's hobby. A lovely little passion project for Daniel. Keeps him busy. Still hoping he'll eventually land somewhere with more structure. Something with a future. Claire's expression shifted. Her brow creased for just a second, like something didn't sit right. She looked at me again, like she wanted to follow up. But Mom jumped in before she could. With practiced volume and impeccable timing, she launched into some over-the-top story about how Ethan used to be terrified of clowns. And just like that, the spotlight moved, the subject changed, and any attention on me disappeared like it always did. And that's when another memory pushed its way in, one I didn't ask for. A few months back, Dad had been on the phone with Mr. Whitman, his old friend from the country club. I hadn't meant to listen, but the study door was open, and his voice carried. No, Daniel's still tinkering with that little website of his, he'd said, in that same overly polite tone he used when someone brought a weird dish to a potluck. It's sweet, really. Bless him. But, you know, it's not exactly making waves. Now Ethan, that one's on fire. He hadn't just dismissed me to my face. He was out there telling his version of my story to everyone else too, reinforcing the image of me as the family's lovable, harmless failure. The thought left a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth, like I'd swallowed a rusted coin. The toasts began. Claire's dad stood up first. He gave this warm, heartfelt speech about welcoming Ethan into the family. He was genuine, you could hear it in his voice. Then Dad rose. He raised his glass, and with his well-worn voice of paternal authority, began showering Ethan with praise. A son who's never caused us a moment of worry, he said, sweeping his gaze over the table like he was making sure we were all paying attention. Who surpassed every hope we ever had for him. A real success. The embodiment of hard work and excellence. Then, the pivot. I saw it coming a mile away. He turned toward me, face softening like this was some tender moment of fatherly concern. Of course, he said, with a heavy pause, life's not a straight line for everyone. His voice dropped an octave, full of fake empathy. Some people take detours. Some hear a different drumbeat. And we, of course, continue to support Daniel as he searches for his own way, his own, unique path. It was wrapped in kindness, but it felt like a brand. Daniel, the detour. Daniel, the one chasing faint drumbeats. Daniel, still figuring it out. I stared at the tablecloth, the fine, starched white linen suddenly felt like sandpaper under my fingertips. Beside me, Mom gave a soft sniff, timed perfectly, part of the act. Always the co-star in Dad's one-man show. The air was thick. Heavy with judgment no one dared say aloud but everyone felt. I could feel Claire watching me, her eyes holding a quiet question. And in that moment, it hit me hard, that sinking, suffocating feeling of giving up. Like a voice deep inside just whispered, "So this is how it goes." Again. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am the shadow I can't shake. The toast ended, and the clinking of glasses felt forced, obligatory. Nobody really tasted their champagne. I didn't look up. I just stared at the weave of the tablecloth, bracing for the rest of the night, knowing exactly how it would go. Same script, same lines. Me. I was just a background character in the Brooks family story. The placeholder son. The guy with all that potential no one really believed in anymore. My parents looked absolutely thrilled, still glowing from Dad's monologue. Ethan, as always, accepted the praise like he was doing them a favor. His humble nod, all practiced charm, didn't reach his eyes. And that's when Claire turned to me again. Her voice was soft, but somehow it cut through the low buzz of the restaurant. "Healthbridge," she said, locking eyes with me. "You said it helps people with disabilities navigate healthcare." I blinked, a little thrown. She remembered. She actually remembered, in the middle of all this Ethan worship. She cared enough to ask. "Yeah, that's pretty much what we do," I told her, nodding. "We try to make it easier for folks with disabilities to find the right specialists, connect with the right programs, cut through all the red tape. Just make the whole healthcare thing less of a nightmare." Her eyes were already bright, but then something sparked, like something just clicked inside her. "And your name, it's Daniel Brooks, right?" she asked, leaning in, her voice dropping into a whisper that somehow seemed to make everything else around the table fade. "Wait," she said, suddenly breathless. "Are you, the Daniel Brooks, CEO of Healthbridge?" At that exact second, the sound of someone dropping a fork at a nearby table cracked like a firework in the sudden silence that swept across our group. I looked up, startled. Her voice had lit a fuse. My dad, mid-sip of his wine, froze with the glass halfway to his mouth. His eyes locked on me, wide and unblinking. Mom's smile, always photo-ready, vanished in an instant. Her jaw slackened, and one hand flew to her pearls like they might offer protection. Ethan's smirk evaporated. Whatever smug thought he'd just been enjoying fell away, leaving him staring at me like he didn't recognize who I was. Even Claire's parents, who'd been politely humoring Dad a second ago, turned their attention to me, suddenly alert, like something seismic had shifted at the table. I hadn't even had time to say yes before Claire lit up with a kind of raw, brilliant joy that cut through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. "Oh my God. It's you," she said, her voice rising with excitement. "Healthbridge is amazing. My brother, Jake, he was paralyzed in a car accident 3 years ago. What you built has been a lifeline for him. His rehab doctors, they recommend your platform to every long-term patient they get." She turned toward the rest of the table now, her words pouring out with genuine, emotional force. "You don't know what it's like, trying to find the right doctors, coordinate between different specialists, dealing with endless insurance calls. It was hell. But Healthbridge, it changed everything for us." She kept going, her voice full of conviction. "Jake even found an adaptive sports group through one of your links. It gave him his life back. It helped him feel like he still belonged somewhere." She started naming features, the curated lists of accessible clinics Dad had once waved off as niche, the private peer support forums where Jake found real connection, the built-in telehealth that saved them hours of exhausting travel. She even mentioned reading an article about the low-profile but brilliant CEO behind the platform. Never in her wildest dreams did she think it was her future brother-in-law, the so-called free spirit of the Brooks family. "We've actually been trying to get our hospital's foundation to officially partner with Healthbridge," she added, turning to me again, eyes wide with admiration. "What you're doing, it's incredible." I felt this wave of heat rush through me, a strange lightness followed right behind it, like I'd just stepped off a roller coaster. The room felt tilted, like reality had been nudged sideways. Was this really happening? To me? I looked around the table. My father's face, usually so flushed with authority, had gone ghost white. Mom's mouth was moving, but no words came out. Her eyes shimmered with what might have been tears, not the kind she summoned for attention, but real ones. And Ethan? He looked like someone had knocked the wind out of him. His mouth hung open, eyes narrowed with something between shock and, honestly, resentment. The silence was deafening. For once, no one had a clever follow-up. No one was spinning the moment. They didn't know how. And then, almost without realizing it, Claire landed the final blow. "It's kind of funny, actually," she said, brow furrowing as a memory floated back to her. "Jake told me he overheard some folks at a charity event last year, pretty well-off types, I think, talking about Healthbridge. One of them, I think the name was Whitman. He was bragging about his son, some finance star, and someone else asked about his other kid. And they laughed, like, actually laughed, and said he was doing something with a website for disabled people. They called it, admirable, sure. But they made it sound like it wasn't a real career. Like he'd fallen short somehow." She paused. Her gaze drifted from me, to my father, to my mother. And then it hit her. "They said the family name was Brooks," she said, her voice suddenly quiet. "Oh God. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. Whitman." The name landed in my gut like a punch. Mr. Whitman. My dad's buddy from the golf club. His trusted confidant. The phone call I'd overheard months ago, the one I'd brushed off as harmless dad talk, came crashing back with brutal clarity. This wasn't just ignorance. It wasn't that they didn't understand what I was doing. They knew. And they'd gone out of their way to downplay it, to rewrite the story so it fit their version of success. Ethan, the star. Me, the sweet kid playing tech startup in his garage. They were ashamed. So they made me small. That phrase, little website, it stung more than I expected. Not because it was wrong, but because it was intentional. My dad, usually so composed and commanding, looked like he'd taken a hit. His face flushed red, then went pale again in seconds. Mom let out this tiny, broken sound, not her usual dramatic sigh. This time it was real. Painful. Maybe even guilt. And all I could do was sit there, watching everything unravel. We never realized how big it actually was, Daniel," my mom whispered, her voice shaking as she tried to gather herself. "We just thought it was, something small." The rest of her words just sort of crumbled away, swallowed by the mess of her own well-rehearsed story unraveling right there at the table. The silence was brutal. Thick. Smothering. Claire's parents looked completely lost, their eyes bouncing between me, Claire, and my shell-shocked parents, clearly trying to make sense of the emotional wreckage playing out in front of them. Eventually, every pair of eyes landed on me. For a second, I felt the adrenaline hit, that familiar buzzing in the ears, but underneath it came something unexpected, stillness. Calm. Like something had finally settled. All those years of swallowing frustration, of walking on eggshells, of carrying the quiet pain of being the family's invisible one, it started to melt away. I looked straight at my dad. Then at my mom. Then at Ethan. And when I spoke, it wasn't loud or dramatic. Just steady. Plain spoken. Honest. Healthbridge has over 100,000 active users in 15 states, I said. We're partnered with 3 state healthcare agencies. And we've got a waiting list of national nonprofits who want to integrate with us. I paused just a beat, not for effect, just to breathe. Last quarter, we wrapped up a funding round. Our lead investor was one of the top healthcare venture capital firms in the country. That was it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flex or gloat. I just laid it out. Facts that had always been real, whether they'd chosen to believe them or not. And just like that, something shifted. You could feel it in the air. The whole mood of that over-the-top restaurant, the velvet chairs, the quiet clink of forks, the glow of chandeliers, all of it suddenly felt hollow. For once, my father had nothing to say. He just stared at me, lips parting and closing like he was trying to find words that wouldn't come. It was the first time in my adult life that he was speechless. He was face to face with a version of me he'd never let himself see. The rest of the engagement dinner passed in a weird, stifling blur, like we were all sitting in the aftermath of an emotional detonation, sifting through what was left. To their credit, Claire's parents did their best to pull things back. They asked thoughtful questions about Healthbridge, not the polite kind, but real questions, curious and respectful. I answered clearly, directly. Told them about the mission, the tech, the partnerships. I didn't dress it up, didn't downplay it either. There was no need to rub anything in. The truth had its own kind of power now. Dad stayed quiet. It was unsettling. His usual voice, booming, full of opinions and judgments, had vanished. Now he just sat there, fidgeting with his water glass, clearing his throat like he was trying to swallow something he couldn't name. Maybe it was pride. Maybe guilt. Maybe just plain shock. Mom, she kind of folded into herself. She kept trying to say something, little broken starts like, we didn't know, and, Daniel, we always wanted the best for you, but none of it came out in one piece. Her trademark sighs were still there, but they weren't performative this time. They just sounded tired. Worn out. Like a balloon slowly losing air. Ethan. He looked like someone had pulled the rug out from under him. He sat there, not touching his meal, his jaw clenched tight. He wouldn't even look at me. That smooth, self-assured smirk he wore like a second skin was gone. Now his whole face was drawn tight, sour. Like he didn't know who he was anymore if he wasn't the golden child. He looked like a king who just realized the crown didn't mean much if no one bowed anymore. As soon as it was polite to leave, I did. I muttered my goodbyes. The food, what little I'd eaten, tasted like cotton. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody knew what to say. Stepping outside into the night felt like coming up for air after being held underwater for too long. And in the days that followed, my phone started to buzz with something I wasn't used to.